Thank you everyone for coming here. I know it's a nice summer day out and taking the time to sit here and see this presentation. Obviously it's important. So I'm going to make it worth your while, I promise that. Alright, so by the way, how many of you saw Greta Thunberg's speech at the UN this week? Everyone, wonderful. You know, she actually very eloquently expressed the emotions that a lot of us feel. But then at the end of it, we're left with, okay, this is a problem, I recognize it, but what can I do about it? And this topic, what I'm going to talk about today is at our level, as individuals, families, what can we do to address the issue? That's what this is about. So, presenting a practical case for zero emissions energy and transportation that we can actually get to. And before I get into details, this is strictly a non-commercial presentation. I'm not trying to sell anything. I don't represent any company, product, or anything here. I don't own stocks in companies, so this is strictly a volunteer, responsible citizen kind of a presentation that I'm giving you. So this presentation is divided into two parts. One is we try to understand what the environmental challenge is, what is the problem that we're trying to deal with. And the second question is, okay, can we reach zero emissions? Is there a practical path to get to zero emissions for us? Not the governments, not large organizations, for us, people living in the cities and towns. So let's look at the environmental challenge first. I want to take a quick step back and look at the history of air pollution. Air pollution, amazingly, is a very recent problem. It's not something that happened for hundreds of thousands of years or even 100 years. It really started with the 40s and 50s when there were enough cars on the road, enough industrialization that it was difficult. The carbon emissions became, the concentrations became high enough that it was deemed as a problem. And the first response to that was in the 1970 Clean Air Act that Nixon had signed. Nixon was also, by the way, responsible for creating the EPA. He was the president when the EPA was created. And really the intent there were a few problems, specific problems that were primarily being addressed here. So cars and trucks produced these pollutants. They're called sulfur dioxide gases, nitrogen dioxide gases, and particulates. And sulfur dioxide gases were produced mostly by burning gasoline. And the effect of these, the byproducts of burning gasoline is that it produces small particulates. And these fine particulates actually, when we breathe them, they actually settle in our lungs. And the finer they are, the deeper they go. And once they get there, they basically stay there for the rest of the person's life. There's no way to get them out. And if they accumulate enough, then they start giving us respiratory and breathing problems. The nitrogen dioxide is produced by burning fuel, which was mostly by trucks, and it formed smog, which also caused respiratory disease and asthma. So to address this, the Clean Air Act was put together. The next significant event in this was in 1990 when we had the Clean Air Act signed by the senior George W. Bush. And really the issue addressed here was this ozone layer. For those of us who are old enough, you will remember that there was this big issue that there is a layer of ozone over the north and the south poles, and if that ozone layer was slowly being depleted by some of the chemicals that were being used in the industry. And it was actually, ozone has this role of absorbing UV rays from the sunlight. And if that absorption is removed, then if we go out in the sun, we'll have skin cancer basically. So to address this issue, this Clean Air Act 94 was signed by Senior Judge Bush. And this was to limit or actually eliminate those chemicals that were used in refrigerants and other chemical cleaning process and so on. Okay, so the next significant event, there was also the Montreal Protocol, which was around the same time addressing the same issue. The next significant event was the Kyoto Protocol, and this was when it was not just a US issue, it was an international issue. And many countries got together and decided to come up with some regulations to be able to address the environment issue. Now here, the nature of the problem had transformed or changed. And here we were looking at what is called greenhouse gases. Okay, so greenhouse gases overtook all of these problems and became really the major issue that needed to be addressed. So let's try and understand what is about greenhouse gases that we are really concerned about. This is a chart that shows two things. The red line shows the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for the last 500,000 years or so. And basically, and the orange one shows the temperature, the average temperature of the atmosphere, basically. And what it really shows is that as the carbon dioxide increased and decreased, the temperature also tracked it. So there is a direct correlation between carbon dioxide and the amount and the temperature variations of the atmosphere. What is concerning is, since in the last 60, 70 years or so, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing rapidly, like as an exponentially. And a lot of it is, or most of it is because of human activity, because of burning all the fossil fuels and things like that we're burning. And if we do nothing, the projection is that this is going to be, the CO2 emissions is going to increase by a lot in the next 50 years or so, 30, 50 years. So why should we be concerned about that? So what this is showing is basically the Earth receives a lot of radiation from the sun, and it receives the radiation, but it's also radiating energy out, which is really, it's like a dim glow at longer wavelengths that the Earth sends out. And in normal circumstances, there is an equilibrium, which means that the amount of energy that is received by the Earth is the same as the energy that's radiated back out into space by it. The problem with CO2 or emission or greenhouse gases is that the greenhouse gases tend to store or absorb the energy and keep it. And that leads to an imbalance. So the amount of energy that we are receiving and we are sending out, there is a net energy that stays on the Earth. So there's this imbalance that is the concern here. And what that leads to is slow increase in the temperature of the atmosphere, and that is the issue here. This is really showing broadly, this is the total amount of sun energy that comes to the earth. Some of it gets reflected by the atmosphere, some by the clouds, and some gets reflected by the earth's surface. About half of it gets absorbed by the land and the oceans. And this is the way it gets radiated out. So some of it is released by the, it turns into vapor, water vapor, and clouds, and then it gets released by the clouds. And so all these radiations, the point here is there is this cycle of amount of energy being received and the amount of energy that's going out, and there is this net imbalance that we're concerned about. This is really showing the CO2 emissions in the world from this period, 1750 to 2050. And you can see that as the industrial age progressed, it really started to become, the amount of CO2 is really rising exponentially. And this is really where the concern is, by the rapid rise of CO2 is storing so much heat or so much of the solar radiation in the atmosphere that it's going to lead to a condition that may be irreversible. And I'll explain that in a second. So this is really showing the carbon cycle and deposit. So there is carbon dioxide in the Earth system right now. Some of it is in the atmosphere, some of it is in the buried under the oceans, some of it is absorbed by trees. And so there is this cycle. It comes in and out. The CO2 gets absorbed by the trees, and then it gets converted back into oxygen, and so on. So there is a balance there, and as the temperature of the atmosphere increases, the amount of the cycle will get disturbed, and that's the issue. The one major concern is this effect on what is called the permafrost. So permafrost, this is the North Pole, and if you went straight up from the North Pole and look down, there is this, this is Canada, Russia, and so on, and Greenland. And there is this area that is permanently under a permanent frost or permanently frozen. And the issue here is that below the permafrost, there is large amounts of carbon dioxide that is has been trapped, which has gathered there over tens of thousands of years or longer. And this is really all the vegetation and all the animals that died and their bodies decomposed that produced all these CO2. And that amount, the amount of carbon dioxide stored there is much, much more than what exists in the atmosphere right now. So the issue is, if the temperature reaches a certain level where this permafrost starts to melt, then the issue is that the amount of carbon dioxide that it will release will be way more than what human activity produces. So that's what would cause what we call a positive feedback cycle, or a runaway condition, in which case the more carbon dioxide is released from the permafrost, the more the temperature will rise, and it will become a feedback cycle that will basically cause a runaway condition. So that's really the irreversible point of no return that we are looking at, that we're concerned about. Now, time-wise, a couple of years ago, the general scientists had agreed that 2050 was the time at which, if we continue to do what we're doing with no change, the do nothing scenario, by 2050, this will be, we'll reach that stage of irreversible. And every time the more data comes in and the more refined the information becomes, that calendar is being pulled up. So it became 2040, and right now it's at 2030. So at 2030, this, if we do nothing and don't change significantly, we're going to be in this runaway condition, and there's not much that we're going to be able to do about it. That's the general consensus. So what is the effect of all this? So rising global temperature will cause Arctic and Antarctic ice to melt, and the sea level will rise, and that will make low-lying land areas submerged. It will cause coastal flooding. It will cause freshwater shortage, food shortage, and mass migration. These are the effects that will come out of that. And we're basically unprepared to deal with these situations. That's the other issue we have. We're just not organized to be able to handle many of these issues that we're faced with. So the rising sea temperature will also cause longer hurricane season, stronger hurricanes, and changing weather patterns through Western Americas and Sub-Saharan Africa. These are effects. These are changes that will affect the rest of the world significantly. In North America, the eastern seaboard is likely to see stronger and more frequent hurricanes. Some of that is already happening, as you know. Harvey, Maria, Florence, these are all bigger and stronger hurricanes that have traditionally occurred in the past. The western US is likely to see droughts, forest fires, and flooding. And the Midwest is likely to experience stronger and more frequent tornadoes and river flooding. So basically, in a nutshell, the hotter temperatures will be hotter, and hotter weather will be for longer periods of time, and colder weather will be colder and more severe at both ends. So it's the variation in the cycle that becomes wider and longer for longer periods of time, and that's the thing we're concerned about. So basically, there's greenhouse gases are the most significant concerns in our times. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the living room, and there is a clock ticking, so there is a time limit in which we can respond. Okay, so that is the scenario here that we are faced with, and now the issue is, what can we do about this? Is there something that we can do to address this in a practical manner? Okay, so this is the question we have. Is the transition to sustainable energy and transportation even possible given today's economic condition and today's technology level? And that's what I'm going to. And we make the case that it is in fact possible to get to zero CO2 emissions and long-term sustainable energy and transportation. The solution that I'm presenting isn't 50% there or halfway there. This is the complete solution. This is good all the way. I'm going to describe how we get there in a practical way. So the first portion of it is really the electrical supply to the houses. And one of the less known facts is that even the state of Massachusetts, the total amount of solar energy that it receives is about 8 times more than what it consumes. So if we do a good job of just trapping solar energy, it can take us a long way to meet much of our income.
What percentage is that of the total? Well, it's 8 times what you use, but what is that percentage of the total
Okay, so just to give you numbers, we in the state of Massachusetts consume about 53 terawatt hours of energy per year. We receive about 799 terawatt hours.
And what's the total use?
53.
50,
53.
53.
So, and this is one source. Now we have wind energy, we have other sources of energy that will make up. So, it, even if it doesn't get there all the way, we don't get 100% of solar because solar has this limitation that you do have to have a way of storing it. You only get it during the daytime. And I'm going to get into, you know, how that is addressed, in a practical way. So the other piece of it is economics. Okay, yeah, it is 800 versus 50 and all that, but how much does it cost? Is it really something so expensive that none of us can really afford it? It's out of the question. So in that case, I'm basically wasting your time. So let's just look into that a bit. So basically, just describing I'm going to describe what the solar panel system looks like and the guts of it in a very basic sense. So solar panels, you've seen solar panels on tops of homes. You've seen them if you drive through Westborough. There are these solar panel farms all over the place. So the principle is very easy. Sunlight falls on it, and there's a particular device or cells that actually convert solar energy into electrical energy. And basically, that's the way it works. This is really showing the solar energy has a lot of a certain bandwidth or width, we call it bandwidth, which really, in layman terms, consider them like drops of energy, like raindrops, like little drops of energy. And there are different sizes, small, medium, big. The real small, they call photons, but just consider them as drops of energy. The real small ones, they get reflected back. They're not able, the solar panels are not able to absorb them. The ones that are too big, they get absorbed as heat, so they can't really be converted into energy. But there is this sweet spot in between that's in that region here. That's the portion that gets absorbed by these solar panels and gets converted into energy. It turns out that the maximum amount of energy that's coming from the sun is really in that sweet spot. And that's not by chance, that's really by design. They knew this, and so they would design them such that you can take the maximum advantage of this. But there is room for improvement. It is possible to improve that, make it broader, and get even more energy out of it. Okay. So, solar panel system, what is it? Let's just look at what it's made up of. In basic sense, a solar panel system consists of four components. There are these solar panels. These are the panels that are sitting on the roof of homes, being exposed to the sun. Then there is this thing called inverter. And I'm going to get back to it. Then we have something called a net meter, and then we have the electrical panels. Now, the electrical panels, all homes already have. When you build a house, there are these electrical panels, which is basically a distribution system. Solar panels are basically, we just looked at them. These are panels that absorb the energy and convert them into electricity. Inverter is basically a device that takes so the sun is falling on as the sunlight is being produced, electricity is being produced. It produces what is called DC current or direct current. And the voltage varies. So inverter does a few things. One, it's a voltage regulator. It takes all those variations and smooths them out and brings it to a certain DC level. And then, remember, our utilities provide only AC current. So it converts the DC current into AC current. So that's the purpose of the inverter basically. It's a regulator and inverter because it inverts DC current into AC current, which the utilities use. All of our appliances, all of them use the AC current. So it's in the form that is usable. Net meter is basically a power meter, just the way we have at home, except that this is a special kind of a meter. It has the capability of going forward and backward. So the benefit, the reason this is put in is during the daytime when it's a really hot summer day, the solar panels are actually blasting away. They're creating a lot of energy, and so that energy has to go somewhere. There has to be either a battery or some sort of a destination where the battery can go, right? And so the net meter, the way this works is when the solar panels are producing more, the net meter actually starts to go backward. In other words, it's actually supplying energy to the utility company. And the utility company is keeping track of how many kilowatt hours of energy did you give back to them. Now there's two things. Either you can sell it to them or you can keep it. In the system, we have this system, this is the way we keep it. We keep it because we want to be able to use it when we need it. For example, at night and other times of the day, when there's no sun, we want to be able to use the energy. So it's sort of an account where our excess energy is stored so that we can draw on it when we're not, when the sun is no longer. Okay, so that's important. And then the electrical panel, we know what it is. It's basically a distribution system where the utilities brings in the power and then it's being distributed to the house, to all the devices that we're using. Okay. So now another piece to know is there is this term, it's called solar access percent. What this really means is that the solar energy companies, the companies that install these solar systems, they have access to this information, which is really called LiDAR. LiDAR is a type of camera which takes 3D images. So they've taken entire cities, large areas, and they basically have 3D images of those, LiDAR images of those areas. And what they do is, when you approach them, these are basically third party, and when you approach them, they can actually figure out from their data how many trees are around a particular house and at what height and at what location. And from that, they also know the angle of the sun and they know the weather pattern of the area, so they can put it all together. It's basically a program which puts it all together and tells you how many panels you're going to need to be able to meet your annual needs of electricity. And so solar access is actually the actual sun energy per year that's available to you versus the total sun energy. Total sun means if your house was in the middle of a desert with nothing around it and all through you got all the sun that you could possibly get, that's the total energy. And actual energy is really the net energy that you get from after all these subtractions. And typically that number is put up at 70% or more. So if it's 70% or more, it's financially viable. But that number is I would consider that as rock hard. It's really nominal, and these things keep changing because the technology is changing and everything else is in a state of motion, in movement. So that information could actually be different today than it is maybe a couple of years ago. What this is showing is the cost of a typical 4-bedroom home in our area, Massachusetts area. And basically, it depends on the size of the family and area of the house and things like that. But there are two pieces to it. One is the initial cost of the houses, of the solar panel system. And the other is there's a number of incentives that are available from the government. So as soon as you put a system on, the federal government gives 30% off, basically. 30% of the cost gets deducted from your tax return. And with my wife is joining me, so I'll tell us. All right, so this is really showing the cost of the system, and we're talking somewhere between, I would say, 15,000 to 25,000 net after the returns. That's the total investment. And what it comes down to is, you're paying a certain amount of electricity bill, and if you take this out as a solar, there are banks that are giving out solar loans. So if you work out the numbers, how much extra would you be paying per month? And that's really what it comes down to. Right? If it's a lot, I know for an average family, it is really hard to pull out, extra expense that you can put in this. But at least in our experience, it's more like $100 a month is about as much as it takes to do this. Not easy, I'm not saying it's tough, but not outrageously high that you can't even think about it. That's really where it is. But the more interesting piece is what happens in the long run. So this is really what is, I'm sort of cutting to the chase, getting down to the bottom line. What happens in 25 years? So if this is the amount of, if this is the current, this is the rate per kilowatt hour if you buy energy from the utilities directly. And this is if you're buying it from one of the third-party vendors, which are nowadays, giving you a 24-month deal and a 36-month deal and all that. So, and I don't know if that deal is going to continue for the long term. I don't know why they have a short-term limit on those rates. They should just say this is the rate now, and if it goes up, it goes up. They should leave it there. But bottom line is, with all the interest payments and all that for a typical system, I have a nominal size. Of course, it's one example, and every house will be different. And so it really is something where every family would need to pull out their electricity bills and work out their numbers and see what it's going to look like. So this is just one case to the point, and really would need to be refined or redone for every family. But basically, this is the investment, including the tax. This is the tax credits and rebates you get, and this is what you would not be paying for electricity over the 25 years. If this is the rate, and this is what you wouldn't be paying if that's the rate. And also, there is another piece called SREC. So this is called State Renewable Energy Credit. That's issued by the Massachusetts state. What that does is the utility companies are required to produce a certain amount of energy from renewable sources. And they have two options. Either they set up their own renewable plants, which cost a lot of capital, or they can go to the individual homes and buy energy credits from them. And that actually, for right now, for every 1,250 watt hours or kilowatt hours, you get one credit which is really more like a share, and you can sell it to the utility companies. And typically they sell for between $250 to $300 per unit. So if you add up all those numbers for this particular kind of a system, this is the credit. These are basically extra the credit that you'll be making back. Yes.
I missed the fact of what the two rows were. So utility type vendor.
Yes. So this is the rate if you go. So like if you go to National Grid directly and buy from them,
Okay.
that's the rate. And there are these companies that are actually offering special rates for limited time periods.
Dominion, Meridian, all of those.
Yeah, Dominion, Viridian, there's a few different companies that are doing that. So therefore, limited period. Our experience is that if you go with them for 2 years or so, afterwards it becomes really high. So our experience has not been very. It's been good for the short run, but not for the long.
So this is a vendor that you buy the
Yes.
solar panels from?
No. You buy electricity from. You buy electricity from these. So instead of buying it from National Grid, you're buying electricity for your electrical supply comes from these third-party vendors.
Okay.
Westborough has that.
That's what I was. Okay. But the bottom line is, it is in fact, you're coming out ahead, and it's a bit of pain in the short term because of the externals, but it is actually an investment because in the long run you're coming out ahead, and that's really why I am saying this is a feasible thing to not only feasible, it actually puts you in the positive, and so it's really worth doing. Because no matter what happens when you're talking about these kinds of issues, if the economics doesn't stand, the change will never occur. It's really a known fact. So unless the economics works out, this is not going to happen. And right now it seems like the economics are there and the technology is there to make it work. Okay. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of what really happens when you go into this, the decision of how do you select an installer and what really happens. The question has been asked of me, okay, what do I do? How do I go about doing this if I want to go ahead and we'll talk about it? So when you, so this is a home project like any other project. So what you would do is go into Home Advisor, one of these sites, pull up, get 2 or 3 vendors or somebody you know who's doing this. So take 3 or 4 different suppliers and get quotes from them. It's just like you would do any other home project. And so what they'll do is they'll ask you for your electricity bill. And one of the things that shows up in your bill is this: how much is your month-to-month or energy consumption for the year? And this is where actually you can get middle school and high school kids involved in all this because they can help you with the process of working out the numbers and actually doing the math to see. It's actually a good little project. It's simple, takes a little bit of arithmetic, and a number of things start to become clear. So it's really worth doing as an exercise for the family as a whole. So they'll look at this and then they know how much energy is being consumed by this particular household for the whole year. And based on that, they will be able to size the solar system that you need, which means how many panels are needed to be put on the roof, and what kind of inverter, the sizing of the inverters, and the wirings and all the other things that. So once they basically take this information from you, and then go to the website or their third-party LiDAR data, they'll figure out how much energy your house is getting and all that. And based on that, it's pretty accurate, reasonably accurate, based upon the historical data that's available. So based on that, they'll give you a code, and then you can basically figure out who's the one you're more comfortable with, and then choose one and pull the trigger. That's really the process. It's like any other home project. There's nothing special about it, but you do the due diligence that you do. Okay, so financing is many banks provide solar loans, and typically their duration is for 10 years. So some of the banks, the way they configure this is they make the payment for you, and for the first year, you're only paying interest. You're not paying any principal. And the idea is that within the first year, you would have had enough time to be able to file your tax returns, get your rebates, and pay back that portion of the amount back to the bank. And then whatever is left, they'll re-amortize it for you for the 10 years starting from that period. So they know that this is a fairly safe investment, it isn't going anywhere. And so the terms are reasonable in terms of how they set up the loan for you and make it work. So you're really not stuck with a situation where at first I have to put, a certain amount of 10% or, more from my own pocket to make this work. You don't really have to do that. It's the way the system is configured that's working out. But the thing to note is that the solar credits are actually being reduced over time. So you can see that in 2019 it's about 30%, and next year it's going to be 26%, and so it is slowly being reduced. But that's not really a concern because the solar panel prices are also coming down because the technology is becoming more and more mature. So I don't think there'll be a significant change in the total amount that we're dealing with. Whatever the government reduces, the solar panels make up for it, or most of it anyway. So it still becomes a viable option. Okay, these are some of the questions that are sort of suggested that you can ask the installer how many years they've been in business, because solar panels are relatively new. How many have they installed in the state of Massachusetts? Because there is a bunch of paperwork that goes with it. And most of the companies or solar installers have staff that are dedicated to the paperwork, so they just know how to do it correctly, so you don't have to deal with it. How many systems involved, and ask about whatever details they explain, solar panels, inverters, net meters. They'll I try to understand as much as I can about what the details are and how they work and what the limitations and constraints are. And then what is the warranty on each and what is the workmanship? So there are two different warranties. The solar panels themselves have a warranty of 25 years. And the competitive the solar installers will give a warranty of between 10, 12 years or so. So obviously the fact that they're giving this kind of extended long warranties is they're confident that the technology is stable and can be supported. So that's 25 years is if you take that as the life of the solar panels. Every year the solar panels lose about 0.5% efficiency. So in 25 years it comes to some number like 88-89% of their initial capacity. So they're more or less stable in their output through the life. So here's a summary of advantages and disadvantages of the system. Solar, reduced electricity bills, financial support from the government, or basically rebates. You get your energy independence. You're really not buying energy from some remote location, which you don't know what kind of fuel they're burning and what kind of emissions are coming out. You have full control over it. You have reduced your carbon footprint. You've done your part in reducing the carbon emissions. And it does require very little. It's like a utility, so it doesn't really require any kind of maintenance. If one of the panels breaks down, basically the company comes and replaces it for you, and that's pretty much it. Other than that, they really isn't much that for us. So these are the advantages. The disadvantage, there is a high initial cost, so it actually gets, as I was saying, offset somewhat by the bank loans, and but it does increase your monthly payment, so there's that thing to consider. It is weather dependent. So when there is a lot of sun, you get the summer months, you get a lot of sun energy, and in the winter time you don't get. But it is averaged over the whole year, and with the use of the net meter, that look at the net meter as a battery system that basically stores it for you and then gives it back to you when you need it. So that's how the weather dependence is addressed. It is, you can't take it with you when you move. So if you're planning to sell your house, now if you have a system, the general information out there is that the value of your house does go up when you install a system like that. Particularly if it's not as a loan or but as an owner, if you own the system. Typically 5% is considered the increase in the value of the house. And then there are limitations from surroundings. If there's a lot of trees around and they're very close to the house, then there may be less energy that's coming out. But this is something you know upfront before you go do it, because the solar installers will tell you how much energy you're going to use. And it is inconvenient for condos in those cities, and so people living in condos, this is a hard, it's not so feasible, but this is where the town can help out some, because there's a lot of parking spaces available, and a lot of them get the sunshine all through. So, in fact, if it's done right, it can become a moneymaker for the town, because you can the energy generation. There is some investment in the beginning, but at the end, after you pay it off, it actually becomes an income source for the town itself. So that's really worth looking at. So the other piece to remember is when grid power fails, so suppose there's a storm and the power goes out, the solar panel system also has to shut down. And it's because it's a safety issue, because when it produces energy, it really has to be able to put the energy out somewhere. And if it's not going there, it won't be able to. If it's not going to the net meter, it won't be able to consume. So it is shut down as a safety reason, but there's no grid power. Okay.
Could you mitigate that if you use the battery?
Yes, you can mitigate it, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about batteries in detail. It becomes an issue of cost, because the amount of energy, the present cost of the batteries is high and the capacity isn't where it needs to be. But what is happening in the battery world, I'm going to address that. So to some extent is the answer to your question.
Is there a case for over-provisioning? So you talked about how they look at your usage. Let's say you size system
Yes.
to meet your usage.
Yes.
Is there a scenario for over-provisioning?
Yes.
Because maybe you know, your consumption is low
Yes.
and you want to have a provision system that is reasonable for a lot
Yes.
of.
Yes. So when we put our system, we did over provision, because we were in the process of considering an EV as well. Very good. So over provisioning is, to me, is always a good idea, because you're looking 25 years ahead, and it is very unlikely that you're going to have the same energy consumption over that period. So it's just, in my mind, as much as possible, put it in there, because you can't really lose it, because either the utility companies will take it and pay you for it, or sometime in the future you'll have a need for it. So it's really, over-provisioning is almost a recommendation, I would say.
Question.
Yes.
We have a family of two.
Yes.
You sell a house, the next group has 5 kids. Can you add panels to it? Can you increase your original?
You can add panels to it. So the way this would work is, they would add more panels, and they would change the sizing of not the net meter.
Inverter.
Yes, they would change the sizing of the inverter. Because Well, although the inverters do have quite a bit of capacity, they start at 5,000 kilowatt hours and 10,000 kilowatt hours. So they already have capacity usually. But if not, they're not, the most expensive part of the system. Mostly it's the panels themselves. That's the other thing that's happened is in the last 2 years, there's been a big change in the efficiency of the solar panels. They used to make what is called polycrystalline solar panels, and they used to have an efficiency of 19%, which means of all this energy that falls into it, 19% gets converted. And they now make what is called monocrystalline, and they have an efficiency of 24%. So 5% increase, and the price is also gone down. So the combination makes it more and more attractive as an option. So next thing I'm going to talk about is electric vehicles. So here the issue is we look at an electric vehicle and we think, boy, this is a really expensive piece of equipment. I wonder if I can afford it. And I want to show you a little bit of the guts of it and the details and the costing, the total cost of ownership and all that to show you what is the difference between owning a gasoline car and owning an electric car. So there's a couple of enabling technologies that recently happened that allowed the electric cars to become a reality. And one of them is this thing called lithium-ion battery. Lithium-ion batteries. So one of the reasons why we drive gasoline cars is what is called energy density. The amount of energy that is packed in a gallon of gasoline is really, really high. And that's why it's very hard to beat it. And it's also cheap. So the low cost and the high energy density makes it the reason why we drive gasoline cars. Even though we know that it's bad for the environment and it has this CO2 emission problem, which is time bound and it's ticking serious time bound issue that we're addressing, but we still drive it. Okay, so one of the big changes is this thing called lithium-ion battery. They have the energy density, energy per unit weight, is reached a stage where they become competitive. They have low maintenance. There's really hardly any maintenance that a battery requires. They have no memory. The old batteries, if you remember, there were types of batteries where every few, like a year or two, you would need to recondition them to get back the amount of energy that they could store. And the self-discharge was another issue. If you just let them sit for a period of time, they'll discharge and lose their energy. And then there's this other issue. Okay, lithium-ion batteries, what is the environmental impact of disposing those? Are we actually going to create more problems in the landfill? So it turns out that the material that is used in lithium-ion batteries, most of it is recyclable. So there is plastic that's recyclable, there are rare earth metals that are recyclable, and there are regular liquids that are all recyclable materials. So a major part of lithium-ion batteries is really recyclable. There is value to it. All these rare earth metals that are used, they're valuable. So it makes economic sense to recycle them because there's money to be made in that process. So that's the reason this enabling technology has reached a stage where it's feasible or to have. Yes.
Two issues.
Yes.
One is lithium-ion can be explosive,
Yes.
hazardous,
Yes.
and the second issue is that of passivation.
Passivation. And what is passivation?
That the material inside the cell settles down and its efficiency goes down.
Okay. So I don't know much about passivation. I have not seen it as being raised as a concern in the literature, but I can address the issue of catching fire. And it was a concern, and there have been rare cases that are reported, but the technology has reached a stage where it is much less likely. And, you know, catching fire, a gasoline engine can also catch fire. A gasoline tank can also catch fire. It's not, but it's how frequently. Is it something that batteries is more likely to happen in a battery or not? That's really what the concern is. And let me explain to you the things that are changing. Let me go through the rest of the presentation and it'll answer some of the question, how they're addressing it and why they, you don't hear of batteries catching fire anymore in the last couple of years or so. Very rarely you hear there was in this event that a battery caught fire, but it doesn't catch anymore, and I'll explain why that's the case. It's an engineering problem that needed to be solved and has been solved to a great extent, is really the issue. Alright, so we want to see what a car looks like. What are the basic differences between a gasoline car and an electric car is really going to show. So basically an electric vehicle, these are the basic components of an electrical vehicle. So what you have is you have a motor that drives the vehicles, you have a battery, you have a charging system that you plug in to charge the batteries. And you have a system of it's a thermal cooling system. So these batteries have cooling channels in them, and there's coolant passing through them. All right. And the batteries, most of these cars are computer controlled, so they're constantly monitoring and there's a whole bunch of thermal sensors in the system, and they're constantly monitoring. So when you stop an electric car and get out of it, it still keeps running for a time because it's doing all these checks and cooling off the batteries and things like that. If you leave it out in the sun and the batteries start heating up, the computer senses it and it actually starts circulating the coolant to cool it off. So it's very, very carefully monitored and maintained at the range of temperature that it's supposed to be working on. If it exceeds that, it actually sends a message to the owner that your battery is getting too hot, you need to move it to another location. So these are the number of things that have been done to improve or reduce the chances of having the batteries catching fire. Okay, so there's a charging port, there is there's a DC to DC converter also, which takes battery power and converts it to the form that the motor needs. And so basically what you see here is there's a big component that is missing obviously, and that is the engine. And in an engine is the most complex component of a gasoline car. All these technology developments for the last 150 years have gone into improving the performance of the engine. And here, there is no engine. Now, electric motors, first of all, they're more or less non-contact. There's a magnet and there's a rotating field in the magnet, so there's nothing touching each other except for the bearings. And so there's no contact. So there's not a piston or there's not a cylinder that is, oil cooling and all that stuff is needed. It's basically a non-contact rotating field that's rotating the motor. So there is just naturally, there are disadvantages that there's less friction and less moving parts that are actually going to have a limited life. So this is the other piece that was stunning when I was actually studying this a little bit. An average gasoline car has 30,000 components. An average electric vehicle has 11,000 components. There's 1 to 3 reduction in the number of components. And so if you think about it, spark plugs, how many things you want to count that are part of the engine that require maintenance? Timing belt, water pump, just all the problems that at least I remember having faced in my lifetime with maintaining the car were centered around the engine. And there is no engine, it's gone. So that is the big quantum change in technology here, 1/3 the number of components. So this is really the other piece that is really uh, important, that reduces the maintenance cost, because you have no oil changes, you have no other, all the reasons for which the car used to go to the maintenance shop for regular periodic updates. So there is one maintenance item that occurs. So if it goes electric vehicles, when they go to the service station, they do some lubrication of some of the joints, and once every 2 years, and even that they're looking to extend it to 4 years. Once every 2 years, they'll change the coolant that circulates through the batteries, and that's the only change that occurs. Now, some of these things remain. The tires still have limited life, that has to change. The alignment and wheel rotations, these things remain in the battery, in the vehicles. But everything else, there is just no maintenance. There is no reason to take this to a service center, except for that coolant change. So that's the huge change in, paradigm shift in owning a car when you go from a gasoline car to an electric vehicle. Okay, so this is really showing the real cost of gasoline. When we buy gasoline, we're not just buying fuel as such. We're buying the cost of extraction, transportation. It's coming all the way from some distant location to our gas station. And then there are refining costs, and there are distribution, marketing, profit. All those things are being, so the energy that you're buying is actually has many components that are baked into the price of the gas. The other important piece is a gasoline car. The best designs have an efficiency of about 35%. By this I mean that when you put a gallon of gasoline into the car, 2/3 of it gets wasted as heat. 1/3 of it actually does the work. So every time you put $30 worth of gasoline in the car, you get $10 worth of work, and the other $20 is really burned up into nothing. And just think about it, millions and millions of cars are running around the road, and they're all doing this. And they're increasing the CO2 emissions of the, it is a huge problem that is really, has these mammoth components that can be addressed. So this is really showing the true cost of ownership comparison. So I'm taking a mid-size sedan, okay, that's worth about $25,000 on the road, and that's a gasoline car. And the orange lines are showing the electric car. So electric cars are more expensive in the front end. But when it comes to fuel, when you go to recharge an EV, it costs like a full charge of, let's say, 200, 250 miles range. It costs about $5 or $6, something like that, versus $30 that you spend moving to the gas station. And if you're using solar panels and you sized it correctly, you can put that in, then you're really charging, the cost comes to about way less than that. And so if you notice the topic, the title of my presentation is 4-to-1. Literally, for each mile you drive, the fuel expense is about 1/4 when you drive it. So that's really, it comes down to that. If you're using, it's 3-to-1 if you're not producing solar energy, but it's 4-to-1 if you're producing solar energy and using it to run the car. So, and this is really showing maintenance. This is the average car, a median cost of maintenance of a car for a mid-size sedan. And compared to that, this is the cost of maintaining the electric vehicle. So, in the end, bottom line, there is a difference. The electric cars are still more expensive, over a 10-year period, there's a difference of about 4,000 or 5,000, and it really varies. Some cars are a lot more reliable, so this thing comes down, this costs a lot less. So the difference can be anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 or so in the range, but that's over a period of 10 years. And that's the extra investment that you're making in getting to zero emissions, which is really the bigger goal here that we're trying. So again, it's not outrageously expensive that it's outside the range. You have to be a BMW owner to be able to do this. It really is one of those that it's more about rearranging finances than actually, trying to pull money out of somewhere else to put in here. And actually you come out ahead in the long run. Rearranging finances in the short run to come out ahead in the long run. That's what this is. Okay. So lithium, this is another piece of enabling technology. The lithium-ion batteries, the prices come down even between 2010 and 2020. The prices come down from $1,000 per kilowatt hour to $100 per kilowatt hour. This is like an order of magnitude reduction in 10 years. And it's still going down. So the rate at which the technology is maturing and the costs are coming down is incredibly high here, which is really working in our favor. Yes.
Sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? So does a 10-year cost of maintenance cover replacing batteries at that point, or no?
It does. So batteries run for about 12 to 14 years. So in my case, 12 to 14 years, we replace the car.
Okay.
So, and you can see that it's coming down even more. So the cost of the batteries, you've heard these news articles of people putting up really, really large battery plants. And this is what they're really going after, because first of all, they know that you have 1/3 the number of part counts that you have with respect to the gasoline cars. We're also way more efficient. We have the 30% efficiency versus 98% efficiency. So they've got all that covered. What is really one of the limitations, the big limitation, is the cost of the batteries. And that's when you scale it up, the cost of the batteries goes down. And that's what they're really working on. But already it's at a stage where it's starting to make sense to at least consider it in the mix when you're trying to look for a replacement product. That's really what it is. Okay, so electric vehicles, again, advantages to disadvantages. It's a lower cost per mile. You do get to zero emissions. This is not a 50% solution. This is a 100% solution to get to zero emissions. It has better acceleration because electric motors, because of its naturally low friction, it just has a better pickup. It's even as much as half the pickup of the time to go from 0 to 60, up to half of that of a gasoline car. And the response is immediate. As soon as you press, it takes like microseconds to respond. So it's like you're not waiting for the engine to breathe before it gives you an acceleration. It's all out. Okay, so then there is a long-term warranty on the powertrain. So the batteries nowadays, they give you 100 to 100,000 mile warranty. So if anything goes wrong, they cover it. And it requires little maintenance and has longevity. The disadvantages, there is a higher initial cost. But one way of looking at it is the amount that you are buying gasoline with, you're actually putting it into the cost of the car. That's one way of looking at it. The batteries may need replacement just after 10, 12 years. They have this 120,000 mile warranty, and typically the reported life is 10 to 12 years. But after 12 years, if you want to keep it, you have to replace the batteries. But the battery prices are coming down exponentially. So 10 years from now, the batteries may be a lot cheaper than what they are now. And there's no pollutants from power generation if you're actually going solar, or if you're using renewable sources, you also nail the CO2 emission issue. And wait, this is a disadvantage. So what I meant to say here is that if you're not using solar panels or using conventional electrical energy from the utilities to do this, then you still haven't reduced. We haven't been able to get to the zero
You
emission.
reduced it, you just haven't eliminated it. It's still less.
It is still less, yes,
It
because
has been reduced.
natural gas still has an efficiency of about 60%. So versus gasoline's 35%. So you still have made some gains, but the gains are about half of what you would with the solar. And again, charging is inconvenient for condo and city dwellers. This is again because they're very new, relatively there are fewer charging stations. So if you're in a condo and there are 100 cars and they all need to be charged, that today is not a realistic, but the newer system that they'll design, it will be part of that and they'll be able to take care of it.
Can you go back to the one that had the graphic battery places?
Yes.
So, it's up next to a Tesla, probably
Yes.
yours in that.
Yes.
And I drive a Bolt, so I have a 60 kilowatt hour battery, is probably 85 or so.
Mhm.
So if you just do the math on that, it's $220 a kilowatt hour for 60 kilowatt hour. That'd be $14,000 or so of the cost. If you take that 14,000, it would be a $7,000 less as the curve comes down.
Yes.
So then you go to the total calculation, and that cost difference flips.
It flips,
becomes
yes.
positive
Yes.
just by that one factor alone.
Just by that one
Look up
factor,
to,
yes. That is a very good point. And that's really what the electric vehicle manufacturers are trying to get to. They know that they can, if they reduce this price, they can actually make this car cheaper than a gasoline car. So with all the other.
Very close to the tipping point.
Yes, it is very close to the tipping point. So that's really why this is a serious possibility at this point. So, what this really, we're coming up with that zero emission transportation is in fact within reach. I'm not saying it is cheaper, but it is within reach. It's not an outrageous expense. And it's again a matter of rearranging finances to be able to, and some infrastructure to be able to charge the car conveniently. Of course, you never have to go to a gas station. You come home, you plug the car, you use it, and then you never have to go to a gas station. It's really good. It's a lifestyle change when you go through it. Or you go there to get check your air pressure, by the way. So you have that. Okay. So a couple of things that are worth noting here. There is this the advances. So I told you about lithium-ion batteries and why they made this an enabling technology. One of the big changes that is occurring in the very near future is this change from conventional lithium-ion batteries to what is called solid-state batteries. And the big difference is conventional batteries have this thing called electrolyte, and electrolytes have a relatively low flash point. And those are the ones that used to catch fire until these safety features were put into these systems. The new systems do not have that. They have metal electrolyte. So the liquid electrolyte or the oils have been replaced by a metal interconnect. And what that does is the low flash point that was the battery fire risk is gone. And so now everything, there is the metal temperatures have to rise to the level before this is going to catch fire. So that makes it extremely safe. And also, they reduce the resistance within the battery. So they charge faster. You can charge up to 6 times faster, 2x the size. So you need half the size of the batteries to get the same number of miles. And they're safer, non-inflammable. So now we're talking about having SUVs and bigger vehicles. So Komatsu as a company is making a excavator that will run on battery, 100% on batteries. And again, this is going to run in hot weather and all kinds of conditions that they're perfectly fine with what they're designing them in. And SUVs and larger trucks, so they are talking about putting these in trucks and larger vehicles so that they can take advantage of all the things that I described earlier.
What's the timeline on that, Sharad?
So let me show you that. I have a chart on that. It's not really time, but it's pretty amazing how quickly they're. Okay. Now the other piece is that by the time we already are looking at, there are electric motors, there's a computer that's part of the system, and with all this technology, putting a self-driving car is really just putting a more powerful computer with software in it. So you're very close to a situation where, and they have safety features, which are a number of cameras and sensors that are in these cars, which are there in most modern cars anyway, whether they are gasoline or not, or electric. But it's getting very close to the point where the cars can actually be self-driving, and that's not too far away. 2025, 2030 is the time period when self-driving cars appear to be a real possibility. This is really a chart that describes why self-driving cars make sense. It's a sort of a deviation from my main topic, but it's just worth showing. So between 2005 and 2007, USDOT analyzed about 2.2 million accidents nationwide. And they found that 2 million of those accidents occurred because of driver error, and more than 80% of them were because of distracted driver. So if that number can come down by 90%, I think there's no reason to be, it would be hard to make a justification against it. So the way the metric that they're looking at is how many miles of cars are being driven per accident. So let's say 100,000 miles per accident is the metric that's for gas or regular cars. And electric car or self-driven cars, if they're giving 400,000 miles per accident, that just makes the case for it basically. It says they're 4 times safer, and so it doesn't make sense not to do it. So that's the clear metric that basically justifies their existence. So this is an industry trend, Elliot, to your point. Volvo is phasing out combustion engines by this year, 2019. It's going to stop making them completely. These companies are replacing their entire lineups of cars with electric vehicles. And just last month, Daimler-Benz released a press release that they're giving up all development of gasoline engines. 100% of that research money will go into developing electric vehicles. So that's how drastic the change is occurring in the industry. It's the disruption in the industry is occurring. That's how fast it's. So today, China produces there's about 1 million electric cars in China, and US has about 500,000. So that's another area where there is this big competition in the works. And India is also planning to ban purchase of gasoline cars from 2030. So you won't be able to buy a new gasoline car in India from 2030 onwards. Okay, so are there any questions here? Okay, I have a few slides on heat pump because my goal is to show zero CO2 emission. And we've covered electricity, and we've covered electric vehicles, transportation. Those are 2 big ones. There's still the heating of the home that's remaining. We have to do something about it. And let me show you, this is still new, I have very few charts, but just to give, it's more of an introduction to the topic. So there is something called a heat pump. And heat pumps are another form of technology, and they work very differently than the regular oil and air furnaces that you have. And basically, the way they work is for you, high school student, if you've ever stood in front of an air conditioner and it gives you cold air, right? If you ever go back to the back of the air conditioner, have you noticed it's really putting out hot air, right? So what it's doing is it's taking out heat from inside the room and it's putting it to the outside of the room, right? What if you had a system that worked both ways? You could like switch it around in the winter time so that the inside of the house, the heat that was putting out outside, now it starts to put inside the house, so it actually warms the house. So basically, a heat pump is shifting heat in the hot weather. It shifts heat from inside the house to outside the house, and in the winter, in the summertime, it's doing exactly the opposite. So it makes a cool room cooler, and a warm room warmer in the winter time. So it's shifting around energy. Now, this is not what we're used to. What we're used to is, okay, if my walls are losing heat, I need to burn some fuel, pellets, gas, oil, heating oil, something. And I'm going to replace the amount of energy that I'm losing by burning some fuel. These things work differently. They're not burning, they run a compressor basically, which is a mechanical device. So it's more of a mechanical function than a thermal function. So it's basically moving heat around from where you want it, where it's there to where you want it. So they tend to be more efficient by quite a lot amount, and they work on electricity. So if you can use renewable sources to run heat pumps, then you basically it's become more efficient, costs less, and it's zero emissions. So basically, the heat pumps are actually air conditioning systems. So they actually are air conditioners and heaters at the both times. So at the same time, so they can be cooling the house in the summertime, and they could be warming the house in the winter time. So they do both by reversing the cycle, basically. And they do reduce furnace oil bills. So I'm going to show you the relative cost of heating a home from different fuels in just a second. That will show. I'll explain this a little bit more. And then there is reduced CO2 emissions if you're using renewable energy, and it has low maintenance cost. It does have some disadvantages. It has some initial cost. It is weather dependent, so they don't really work very well when the temperature goes below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason is that there just isn't enough heat in the outer atmosphere to be able to pull into the house. So they become inefficient below 20 degrees. So as a result, they do require some sort of a backup. So if you already have an oil system, for example, and you want to go or reduce the CO2 emissions, then what this does is for the few days in a year when the temperature goes below 20 degrees, the oil furnace will burn. But for the rest of the year, basically the heat pump is going to do air conditioning, which means warming and cooling to maintain the house at the same temperature. So that's the
Comment.
yes.
There is another type of heat pump which uses the ground.
Yes.
I believe it doesn't have that limit of 20 degrees.
It doesn't, but it's a lot more expensive, of course.
You gotta dig up your ground.
Well, also you have to go deep.
Yeah.
You have to go deep.
And you also need some kind of soil.
So, just to give you some idea, this, when I was inquiring, heat pump is costing between $6,000 to $8,000. A geothermal heat pump, one of the persons I know, he put it in his house, the cost was about 60,000, something like that.
Yes, my son put in geothermal, it's 30,000.
30,000.
He's in
So-
bedrock, it's 100-foot well, so it is.
So, to me, that's really not an option. I mean, the economics has to hold. If the economics doesn't make sense, this is not an option. But if it's close, if it's a system like this, yes, good.
I was gonna say, I believe there's a new generation of heat pumps that have come out in the last couple of years, where that 20 degrees is more like 0 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
But it has much better low temperature coverage, such that electric heating coils is enough, so you don't need to have a fossil fuel supplement, you can just use electric heating for the below 0 degree days.
Right.
I had Mass Haven last week, and they had a proposal for a heat pump that went down to -6.
Okay, the newer technologies are better than they're showing.
Okay, great. So again, this is something that is newer technology that's becoming feasible, and it's actually cheaper. It is zero emissions. There is another difference. The lifespan of a heat pump is about 10 to 15 years, and for a gas and oil furnace, it's more like 20 to 25 years. So there is that to consider. This is something that I pulled out from the US, the Mass.gov energy website. So it's really showing the cost of heating a home in New England for different types of fuels. And you can see, well, electric resistance heat is the highest, which is obvious. But the heat pump is at about this much for a house that's about that size. So it's about $1,200. And these are Massachusetts state government's numbers that I'm showing, which probably are an average of the number of houses. So natural gas, a lot of homes in this area do have natural gas heating. So they're still cost effective, this is still competitive. But they're not zero emissions, but they're still more efficient than heating oil. So that these it is still the air source heat pumps are not as cheap as natural gas, but they're almost there. So really, that's all I had. The case that we were trying to make is that the zero emissions is not just some pipe dream or impossible to achieve. It is something that we can get to. It's more a matter of priority and what is important to us. It's really about that. And the practicality is about rearranging our finances to be able to make it happen without putting an undue burden or load on us as regular people. So that's really the presentation.